This is just going to be a very short video of me talking you through Auschwitz as a concentration camp in particular. You can use this to help you fill in the stages 4 and 5 of the Holocaust on the worksheet. So the first thing that you would be greeted by in a lot of concentration camps, extermination camps, but this is the famous one from Auschwitz, is a big metal gate with a kind of slogan written on the front. This one was "Work sets you free." There were variations of this depending on the camp that you went to. So have a think, why would they have, as soon as you went in, a sign that says "Work sets you free"? What did they want to create by doing that? They were kind of thinking to give people hope, because hope is a really, really strong emotion. You're going to this camp, you don't really know what's going on, nobody's telling you why you're being put here and what's going to happen to you. But if you see that sign, "Work sets you free," it's telling you that you're probably going to be having to do some work here, and that if you do a really good job, you'll be allowed to go free. Now that means you're going to really behave yourself, you're not going to protest, you're not going to try and escape, and you're going to work really hard. So it was a very sneaky, cruel way of giving people hope that things would be okay if they just got their head down and did what they were told. But of course, we now know that the aim of these camps was to work people to death. So no amount of work was going to set you free. It was a complete lie. So this is the first thing that you see when you go into Auschwitz concentration camp. I went there about 2 years ago now in May, and we had a tour of the camp. Now, it's split into 2 camps. It's called Auschwitz-Birkenhau. So this is the sign as you go into Auschwitz, which is where most of the people would be living and working. And then Birkenau is just a short walk or kind of bus ride. So kind of like the other field, essentially. And that's where the gas chambers would have been there. In terms of where the camps were, now you can call them concentration camps, death camps, extermination camps, but most death camps or extermination camps are the ones in red, and they would be in Poland, which had been taken over by the Germans, remember, in 1939 at the start of World War One. And a lot of the concentration camps, or prison or labour camps as they might be called, were in Germany. And that's because they wanted Germans to not really know what was going on. So the camps where you had really horrific conditions and thousands and thousands of people being murdered every week, they kind of didn't want that to be shown to the Germans, because they didn't want the Germans to be disgusted and lose support for Hitler and the Nazis. So that's why they're kind of towards Poland, and the labour camps, which, you know, still weren't great, but at least weren't mass murdering people, well, on the other side. Now, we were going to go to Berlin on a school trip, and hopefully if you get to year 11 and you're taking history, that might still happen. If you can see Sachsenhausen concentration camp, which is kind of just above the word Germany, that's the concentration camp that we'll be going to if we ever make it there. And Auschwitz and Birkenau, you can see just underneath the word Poland. That's probably the most famous camp. Treblinka is another famous camp. Buchenwald is another one, and Dachau at the bottom of Germany. Those are all very, very famous concentration camps. Okay, so I want to go through and show you some pictures of my visit to Auschwitz. So this is as we came in. This is that sign that we talked about at the very start. One of the typical things that you would expect to see in a concentration extermination camp would be a lot of security to stop people from escaping. So all around you had these really tall barbed wire fences, and they would be patrolled by SS officers, because it was the SS that ran the camps, and they had really aggressive dogs, attack dogs with them as well. So if anybody ran and a person couldn't catch up, they'd just send the dog to chase them and bite them and bring them down. These are the lookout posts that you would also expect to see in a concentration camp that had SS officers with guns, so they could again see if anybody was trying to escape, they'd be shot, or they could just look over and just check that people were doing the work and they weren't talking and things like that. Another thing that you would expect to see in concentration camps would be a lot of, you could call them huts or you could call them buildings. Now in Auschwitz, they were made out of brick because this place already existed before they turned it into a camp. So these are slightly nicer buildings, as you can see. So this is where some of the SS officers would be living and eating. And it was where some of the people were taken to work, you know, doing things like making wallets and stuff like that to be sold in other countries. So this is a slightly nicer part of the camp. A lot of the prison cells where prisoners were taken and tortured were on this side of the camp as well. This area here I've picked out because it was where every morning they would count the prisoners. So they would make them stand in rows and they would count up how many they had. This would be done every day, every morning, no matter the weather. So if it was boiling hot, you'd have to stand there for hours with no water. If it was freezing cold, remember this is Poland, so it gets very cold in the winter and the spring, you would be out there not wearing much clothes, freezing for hours. And there's a picture there of what it would look like in the 40s where they were doing the roll call. This is telling you exactly who and how many people were killed in Auschwitz. It's famous for being the largest camp and the camp that killed the most people. So Auschwitz was the largest Nazi German concentration and death camp. In the years 1940 to 45, the Nazis deported at least 1,300,000 people to Auschwitz. So a lot of these would be taken from the ghettos when they were liquidated. Some of these would be taken as prisoners of war. So when they took over, well, they tried to take over parts of Russia, for example, they would be taking them to Auschwitz because Auschwitz is one of the closest concentration camps to Russia. So they broke this down into the types of people that were taken to Auschwitz. 1,100,000 of those were Jews, so majority of Jews. Then you have Polish people, then Romani gypsies, then Soviet prisoners of war, so those would be the Russians, and then 25,000 were just people from other ethnic groups. 1,100,000 of these people died in Auschwitz. That means 90% of the victims that died in Auschwitz were Jews. The SS murdered the majority of them in the gas chambers. This is a wall that they've preserved, where if you were being punished by firing squad, so if you were just going to be shot at, they'd line you up against that wall there. So they do a minute silence there every day, and they put flowers there as well to kind of commemorate that. So this was the part of the camp where a lot of the cells were, a lot of the punishments happened. So another punishment was to put as many people as they could into a small cell. And so it'd be about 6 of you crammed into this really small cell, and the idea was they just keep you all there until you starved to death, so they wouldn't give you any food. So it'd take obviously a few days, and it would be obviously really horrible if you were the last person to die, because you'd see everybody die and then obviously you'd be stuck with them in the cell for a number of days. So that one was, I felt really horrible because they let you go into the cells and stuff, and it was really uncomfortable feeling because kind of trying to imagine being one of those people. Now this is in Birkenhau, so this is the camp that's, you know, like a couple of fields down. This is the famous shot that people use a lot when they're talking about Auschwitz. It's the shot of the railway tracks going in to the camp. So this is how most of people would arrive in Auschwitz, would be via the trains from the ghettos, and they'd be all piled into these cattle trucks, which I think I'll show you in a minute. And you'd get to the platform at Birkenau and you'd be sorted into 2 groups. Group 1 would be for the people who were considered to be fit and healthy-ish or able to work. So that would mainly be men and boys or teenagers. If you were a very young child, no, but if you were kind of, you know, kind of, what would you say, like 8, 9, 10 or over, then you'd be considered healthy enough to work. Then the second group would be the ones that, you know, they were no use to the SS soldiers, so they would be the elderly, the very young, so women, maybe women, but you know, if you're a woman and you're fit and healthy, then you would be allowed to, you'd be put into group 1. So group 1 was sent off to work and to, get put in one of these kind of rickety old wooden huts where you'd sleep, and then group 2 were taken straight to the gas chambers and killed almost straight away. If it was really busy that day, you'd be kind of put in one of the huts and you'd kind of just be waiting there with no food or water for a few days, sometimes even weeks, and then when they were ready they'd take you to the gas chambers. That's a really horrible thought. These are the cattle trucks that they would cram hundreds of people into. You can see here there's very little light or air holes, so a lot of people were dying actually on the way to the camps. They weren't given any food, there was nowhere to go to the toilet, so you had to go to the toilet in the cattle trucks. So I always imagine the feeling of that door opening and you kind of being relieved that the horror of this journey was over, but there's more horrific things waiting for you at the camp. Now this is one of the gas chambers. So what happened was when in 1944 and 5, where the camps started to be liberated by the Allies, so the Russians, Americans and British started to find these concentration camps. When the Nazis found out that the Allies were on their way, they basically tried to get rid of the evidence that these camps ever existed. So one of the pieces of evidence is the gas chambers, so they blew them up. This one was left exactly as it was found in the 1940s. So this is how they blew what it looked like once they'd blown it up. And then the other thing that's evidence are obviously the prisoners. So they tried to shoot as many people as they could. And then when their bullets ran out, they tried to burn them in the huts. And then anybody that they didn't have any bullets or fire for, they kind of just left them there. And they were discovered by the Allies when they liberated the camps. So that's obviously another really quite horrifying image. So when you get to this part of Auschwitz, the tour guide got us to walk from the railway station to the gas chamber, because that's the walk that the second group of people would have done. And it was really interesting how you walked from the railway tracks and it takes you about 4 minutes or something like that. They built a load of trees around the gas chambers so that you couldn't see them as you were walking towards the camps. So we're walking towards these trees, and obviously we can't really see the gas chambers because they look like that, they're just rubble. And it was a really sunny day, and the clouds started to come over the sun, so it started to go all grey, and it went really quiet. So even though there's kind of like trees around, I couldn't hear any birds tweeting or anything like that. It was really eerie. So it's almost as if like so many horrible things happened in that particular area of the camp that kind of nature doesn't really go near it anymore. A lot of that gas chamber is underneath the ground, so if you're thinking that doesn't look particularly big, this is kind of like the entrance, and then they'd go underground, and that's where you'd have these big changing rooms where they'd be told to take all their clothes off because they're going to have a shower and they need to be given a new uniform. So they take all their clothes off, they go into this big chamber that even had kind of shower taps coming down from it that weren't going to be used, but were there to make people not panic and think that it was real. And then they would pour this chemical called Zyklon B, which kind of looks like pellets. If you've ever kind of put like rat poison down, it looks a bit like that. When those pellets react with the air, react with oxygen, they create this poisonous gas. So it would be one person's job to pour the poison down, almost like a chimney, and then it would be exposed through air vents in that kind of fake shower room. Now they'd be locked in, obviously, and it would take a few minutes, up to about 20 minutes, I think people said, for everybody in that room to die. And then obviously it'd be the prisoners' jobs. They were forced to then get the bodies out, and then they would burn them in ovens called crematoriums to kind of, because they couldn't bury them because they were killing so many people that there wasn't enough space to bury them, so they would just burn them instead. And then the possessions, all the clothes that they took off, they'd either be burned or they would be, if they were valuable, they would kind of take them. So there was this whole room at the camp full of shoes, full of hair. That was a really creepy room. There was a room full of suitcases, and they were kind of piled high. They went from floor to ceiling, and everybody kind of walked around that room in complete silence because that was the one that made you realise how many people were being killed there, and that they were just normal people that had, you know, nice shoes, ugly shoes, big suitcases, small suitcases, blonde hair, red hair. So that was a really powerful moment of the tour as well. These are what the huts look like inside. So they said that hadn't really changed much. You know, they didn't have a proper floor, wooden planks, no mattress, no blanket. You probably fitting, they said 4, 5 or 6 people, you know, per kind of row there. We went in May and it was like an unusually sunny day, and it was really stuffy in there. So I couldn't imagine what it'd be like in August, and then obviously again in the winter, freezing cold. I like the touch that people put flowers down as kind of like a kind of sign of respect for people that had lived and died there. This is a drone footage that I found on YouTube, so I'm going to try and play it. Sometimes when I play things on a video, it lags. So what I'll also do is I'll upload this clip separately. And so if it's not working here, just stop this video here because it's going to be over after this bit. And you can find the clip separately, but hopefully it will work. So I hope this helps you to understand a little bit more about what Auschwitz looked like, and it will help you to answer the questions on the worksheet. So let's watch this drone footage now if we can, that shows you Auschwitz and Birkenhau from above, and I think there's some writing to go with it that describes different bits.